Every single year, Apple releases a new iPad. And we got to a point where we have 4 different models to choose from. And for the most part, it is quite simple. If you want the cheapest iPad, you go with the iPad. If you want the best iPad, you go with the iPad Pro. If you want the most portable iPad, you go with the iPad mini. And then you have this one, the iPad Air, which is the weirdest iPad that Apple sells. And that is because it does not have an identity of its own. It is simply an iPad Pro minus a couple of features for a lower price. I've been using the latest 5th gen iPad Air for a couple of weeks now, so here are 5 things that I absolutely loved and 5 things that I did not. Okay, now if you have an iPad that supports the Apple Pencil, which are all the iPads at this point, then you have to give Paperlike a try. I've used it myself and it's honestly so good, especially if you're someone who takes a lot of notes or uses an iPad for drawing and sketching. Paperlike adds more grip to the iPad screen, making the Apple Pencil experience feel more like writing on real paper. And every Paperlike box comes with 2 of them in case you mess up. Check out Paperlike by using the link below. And now, back to the video. Starting off with my 5 positives, the first one is the new colors. I'm someone who's always had silver or space gray iPads, and when I got this blue iPad Air, I immediately fell in love. In a way, it reminded me of the Pacific Blue iPhone 12 Pro, which was one of my favorite colors ever on a phone. I did generally enjoy having a more fun iPad that still looked professional and premium despite this more vibrant look. Speaking of this, all colors are way deeper than they were on the iPad Air 4, which had some truly pale colors, which from certain angles, they actually looked like silver, at least to me. So these new shades are a major improvement. We've had a purple one too for a bit, and that too looked pretty stunning. And Apple's attention to detail is pretty incredible here, as even the Apple Pencil attachment points and the USB-C port both match the color of your iPad. If you've always wanted a colorful iPad Pro, this is the closest to it. My second positive is the battery life. Did you guys know that every single iPad from the original has been rated at the exact same 10-hour battery life when browsing the web? Now, since I'm coming from a 2018 iPad Pro and that battery has been through some heavy use, I'm actually seeing a major improvement here from about 4 to 5 hours of usage to around 8. You could argue that I could just replace the battery inside my Pro, which is true, but I just wanted to point out the kind of improvement you would get should you upgrade from an older iPad. It is a bit of a shame how we cannot see the battery health on the iPad when we can see it on the iPhone and the Mac. It makes 0 sense, just like still not having a native calculator or weather app. What are you doing, Apple? My third positive is the overall speed. Whenever I was using this iPad, things were opening and loading in an instant. Just look at this, I have no apps open in the background, and if I open Procreate, there we go, in less than a second, it's already open. And I've also noticed the speed when browsing in Safari, web pages loaded up pretty much instantly. And same applied when opening a large project in Affinity Photo, for example. Look at the loading times between my old iPad Pro, it's like a night and day difference. No matter what I did, the iPad Air was incredibly snappy. And this is thanks to the M1 chip that's inside. I'll get to the negatives right after because I do have a lot of them here, but since I'm just talking about the positives now, if you're looking for the most affordable and the fastest iPad, this is it. And as a bonus, I bet that this iPad would last you for 7 to 8 years, or even 10 or more years. Up until December of 2021, my mom was still using a 2014 iPad Air 2, and while it was slow and almost unusable, it still worked. iPads do last for a very long time. My fourth positive is being able to use my Magic Keyboard that I bought for my iPad Pro. And it worked quite well, just as well as on the iPad Pro, including the trackpad and everything really. In fact, it even lasted me for longer than my iPad Pro did. I got about 2 to 3 hours of more usage out of the Magic Keyboard on the iPad Air. I've used it to type my script notes, to send a couple of emails. It felt like having a tiny 11-inch MacBook Air once again. And my fifth positive is just the overall capability of this iPad. Not even for a second did I feel that this iPad Air could not do what my iPad Pro could. It worked the same. I was able to use all of my apps, everything just worked. And like I said, most of the apps even felt faster. And this is the thing with all iPads really. From the cheapest model to the most expensive, you get the exact same software experience. Same multitasking, same apps, same everything. The only differences being the chip, which dictates how fast your apps load, and the display size. The rest of the experience is mostly the same. So now let's talk about my 5 negatives, with the biggest one being Touch ID. As you probably know, unlike the iPad Pro, which uses Face ID, just like the new iPhones, the iPad Air uses Touch ID, which is built into the power button to lower its cost. However, Touch ID on this iPad never really worked for me. I don't know if it's just my fingers or the weird position that I have to lay my finger in, or the smaller surface of the rectangular shape instead of the circular shape that Apple has been using for years now. Whatever the reason is, 9 out of 10 times I had to use my passcode as Touch ID simply did not work. And coming from the iPad Pro, this was a massive inconvenience. Not just for unlocking my iPad, but also when using certain apps. Not only that, but a couple of times when I was using my iPad Air in landscape mode, my palm accidentally pressed on the power button and locked the iPad. Face ID is a must-have on tablets as you have this large screen device and you just don't want to keep rotating it to find where to place your finger. My second big negative is, of course, the lack of ProMotion that the iPad Pros have. And I get it, Apple wanted to keep one big exclusive feature for the iPad Pros, and ProMotion is just that. But I really do miss it. Like I said, the iPad Air is faster than my iPad Pro, but the iPad Pro is way smoother. Whenever I'm scrolling through a web page or navigating my home screen, the overall user experience is far better on the iPad Pro. Same goes with games. Some support up to 120 frames per second on the iPad Pro, which does make it far more enjoyable to game on. But for most people, especially those who haven't used a high refresh rate tablet before, you would be absolutely happy with the 60Hz display of the iPad Air. My third negative is also related to the display, and that is the display panel technology. Look, this is a $600 tablet that still uses an LCD display. I watched quite a bit of YouTube in bed at night on this, and oh man, coming from the Tab S8 Ultra that I was testing right before the iPad Air, this was a major downgrade, as that one had an OLED display. The blacks on the iPad Air were super grayish, so it wasn't a great experience for watching movies in a low-light environment. Don't get me wrong, the 11-inch iPad Pro also comes with an LCD panel, so this is something that Apple needs to address on both the Air and the 11-inch Pro. But the 11-inch Pro can at least get brighter by around 100 nits. And I did actually notice this a number of times when I wanted to bump the brightness more, only to notice that it was already maxed out. I really do hope that Apple gives the next generation iPad Air an OLED or at least a mini LED display, as some of the competition from Samsung and Lenovo do feature OLED displays at comparable price points. My fourth negative is the lack of a Pro mode. And by this I mean something that truly utilizes the power of that M1 chip. This iPad has the same performance as Apple's latest iMac, and that is just crazy. Yet nothing truly makes use of that power. Mark Gurman suggests that Apple should give us a Pro mode that instantly activates the moment you connect it to the Magic Keyboard. And I 100% agree. I've been stating this for years and years now, as right now iPadOS is still severely limited, and I just don't see a good way for Apple to massively improve it without a major redesign. For example, while the iPad does support side-by-side multitasking, we still do not have a proper file management system and we cannot create folders on a desktop because, there's no desktop on the iPad. The whole experience still feels like just using a larger screen iPhone. The solution is quite obvious. Apple allowing the iPad to boot into full-on macOS the moment we connect it to the smart keyboard, which would technically be possible. However, I do believe that this would disrupt the user experience. Sort of like booting a Mac into Windows, as in that case you would have two very different operating systems. Therefore, I do think that a Pro mode for the iPad would be a better option and something that Apple should definitely consider. And my fifth negative is the price. At $600, the iPad Air is already quite expensive. If you add in the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil, that would bring the total cost to $1,027. In comparison, the Samsung Galaxy Tab S8 with a keyboard and a pencil would only cost you $900. And with that, you get double the storage at 128 gigabytes, as well as a 120Hz display. Now, if you do want to stay in the Apple world, you still need to think twice. Since as soon as you upgrade the storage to 256 gigabytes, you'll only be $50 away from the 128 gigabyte iPad Pro, which would offer you ProMotion, a 100 nit brighter display, better speakers, Face ID Thunderbolt, an ultra-wide angle camera, as well as a flash. So, having said all of this, and having experienced the 5th gen iPad Air for the past few weeks now, would I actually recommend it? In my first impressions video, I said absolutely not. And while I still think that buying an iPad Pro, even if it's an older model, would give you more bang for the buck, I do believe now that if your main priority is to buy the cheapest iPad that will last you for the longest, then the iPad Air is 100% the one to go with. And if you want to get an iPad Air 5 for yourselves, I left some affiliate links down below. I'm Daniel, this has been Zen of Tech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Zen of Tech, signing out. Cheers.